Good afternoon, everybody. Honorable guests, members of our European Parliament, representatives of European Commission, states, institutions, industry, patients, advocacy groups, media, and all our listeners who are following us here, being gathered in European Parliament and in Brussels, as well as those who follow online our transmission. My name is Krzysztof Jakubiak, and I will have pleasure to moderate today's meeting. We meet on European Union Pharmaceutical Roundtable. The initiative to organize this meeting was taken by Mr. Adam Jarubas, member of the Parliament and chair of the SANT subcommittee, who invited all stakeholders, representatives to discuss EU pharmaceutical package and all necessary actions concerning access to medicines, safe access and equal access to medicines for all European patients. Therefore, I would like to ask Mr. Jarubas to opening remarks. Here, please.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Let me start by expressing my deep gratitude to all the stakeholders who reacted positively to the idea of this meeting, and I'm thankful to all who gathered our invitation and here in Parliament and as well remotely. COVID-19 pandemic was probably the greatest global danger we have faced so far in the 21st century. It showed the weakness of the healthcare systems of EU countries, and its health impact will stay with us for many years. But the COVID-19 crisis also turned out to be an opportunity, building social support to strengthen the role of the EU in European health in accordance with the principle of subsidiarity. As Jean Monnet would say, the EU does not develop despite crisis, but thanks to them. Joint procurement of vaccines and other medical resources have proven to be more effective than competing for them, rising prices in global markets. But the COVID-19 crisis has lighted even more what many were already aware of: the problem of EU's dependence on external supplies of medicines, active substances, the so-called APIs, and other medical substances and resources. This is the result of relocation of production outside the EU in the pursuit of low cost due to competition, pressure on profits, but also the pressure from the limited capacities of national reimbursement systems. Hence, the pharmaceutical strategy for Europe to, among other things, restore EU medicinal sovereignty, to implement the reducing risk by attracting production to the EU or diversifying supplies based on reliable partners. Today, we understand that global health crisis can cause unexpected surge in demand and disrupt supply chain. We understand that deliveries may be exposed to various difficulties on trade routes, or that they may be threatened by international tensions, either in the form of blockades or open hot armed conflicts. We see this also currently with the Red Sea situation. Strengthening European pharmaceutical sovereignty, in simple words, sums up to making sure that right medicines are available to patients in Europe when they need them. But to have medicines available means they need to be invented, safely introduced to the market in sufficient quantities, but to have them really available means also that the patients and member states' healthcare financing system can afford them. We need new therapies. It is difficult to accept that there are over 6,000 rare diseases in Europe for which there are currently no drugs or therapies. It is estimated that up to 30 million Europeans may suffer from rare diseases. In many cases, despite therapy for adults, There are no pediatric applications because they require separate verification. As the Belgian presidency stressed, recently essential medicines such as antibiotics, thrombolytics, and insulin were particularly difficult to obtain, while antipyretics and painkillers were also in short supply. These problems are not new, but medicine shortages have increased over the past few years. The reasons for shortages are complex, and the EU is becoming increasingly dependent on imports from a few manufacturers and regions for its medicine supply. The EU has been confronted with several medicines shortages over the past few years, with studies indicating that notification increased by 60% between 2017 and 2019 alone. And it was even before COVID-19. At the same time, EU is not homogeneous. We must be aware of the disproportions in the availability of the same medicines in different EU countries. It is estimated, for example, that in my country, Poland, some medicines are available on average 2 years later than in Germany. And it is not only a matter of the reimbursement procedures. This is at odds with the EU single market or the idea of the European Health Union. This contributes to double standards in health in the EU, to a Europe or different speeds in health. This makes health in Europe dependent on postal code. We meet today to discuss the first major reform of the EU medicines market in over 20 years, the directive and the regulation on the pharmaceutical package. And although the amendments in the European Parliament committees have been already tabled, the negotiations to find the right compromise are taking place right as we speak. All the rapporteurs and shadow rapporteurs working on it are occupied with the process. Thus, I'm grateful to MEP Sokol, who will be in a minute, EPP shadow to the pharmaceutical package regulation, for finding time to listen to the stakeholders. At the same time, the challenge of European medicinal sovereignty obligates us to consider this all within the global competitiveness context. That is why in the second part of our roundtable, we shall focus on shortages and critical medicines. Expectations of the European response to drug shortages and the restoration of European drug sovereignty are growing. Ladies and gentlemen, elections to the European Parliament, the process of shaping the new European Parliament, new Commission, may mean that the Polish presidency 2025 will de facto take over the baton from the Belgian presidency in the relay in terms of completing the initiative started this half of the 2024 in the area of health, of completing legislative work, for example, the pharmaceutical package. Therefore, it is good that today we have wide representation of stakeholders, including the Belgian presidency and the Polish administration. But enough with me, we gathered here to listen to the stakeholders. Therefore, without further ado, I change all into ears and give the floor to our guests. Thank you.
Thank you very much. At the beginning, let me remind some key points from our agenda. We will have some opening speeches and then 2 debates. Each debate will follow by a short Q&A session available for all present here and also for people who are connected to us online. Our ambitious goal is to finish at 6:45, 7 p.m. at the latest, let's say. So I think that it will be very interesting. And now we will begin with some short addresses that will draw the landscape of our today discussion. And first will come, of course, from the SANT, Mr. Rainer Becker, Director of Medical Products and Innovation. DG SANT, welcome. And could you please give us some perspective and tell honestly where we are with pharma package proposition in process.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Hello, everybody. Maybe allow me to start with the words of someone else. Calls on the Commission to look into policy options that help guarantee that centrally authorized medicines are marketed in all member states and not just in those that are commercially interesting. Of course, you recognized those were the words of the wise house of the European Parliament in the resolution in response to when the Commission had presented its pharmaceutical strategy in 2021. And the challenge mentioned in this resolution, and I think the, what do you call it, postcode lottery or passport lottery, it depends on where you live, whether you get the treatment, is a very real issue. And the numbers, unfortunately, back the statement of the Parliament. If you look at the period 2018-21, there were 168 medicines authorized by the European Medicines Agency, so centrally authorized. And by 2023, in my home country, Germany, we had 147 on the market, so roughly 90%. If we look now at our host organizing country in Poland, in the same period, so for the same period at the same time then 23, it was only 30% of all the centrally, and that is not even going to the bottom of the graph. I just picked Poland because of our lovely company here today. Many other countries have, and I'm not even thinking of the islands, Malta and Cyprus, many other continental countries are faring much worse. I think it's great that our strong absolutely critical for all of us, not least as we're all currently, or at least potentially, patients. But innovation is not a goal in itself. It needs to reach the patients who need it. And the pharma package therefore proposes a modulated system of incentives that rewards innovation and bring innovation to the EU citizens, regardless of whether we're born or where they happen to live or what is their postcode. Concretely, pharma companies that are genuinely prepared to sell and take the necessary steps to sell their innovative medicines in all member states would get 2 more years of regulatory exclusivity, which means 2 more years of financially attractive earnings before the market opens to price competition. It's a quid pro quo approach that will allow, at least potentially, 70 more million patients in the EU being served with medicines, I think one could also having access to the medicines that potentially are life-saving or at least potentially curing serious illnesses. And the legislative proposal also contains several more incentives to bring needed innovative medicines to the market. For example, if the medicine addresses currently unmet medical needs, or another example, if the medicine is developed that finally treats a rare disease or diseases for children. Or for the first time, there are also now regular incentives for the innovative repurposing. It's not just the recycling, it's really there's innovation behind that to be sure and that it's tested and safe that for another indication, medicines can be used. Again, an incentive for that as well. And as a result, in some cases, some medicines could even receive more regulatory exclusivity than today. We sometimes hear calls, also in some quarters of this parliament, that the period of exclusivity where companies earn more because they're not alone, they are still alone in the market, should be even extended. There, I would really like to make a call for caution. An additional year, a single additional year of standard regulatory protection would cost health systems in our simulations, our calculations, 1.23 billion euros a year. And this cost would, of course, be much higher if one were to go beyond this 1 year, say, having 2 more years. And that's also that, as we all know, it is sometimes that one can hear in the current debate. The reform package will also, in other aspects, make our regulatory framework for medicines fit for the future, fit for the really the last 3/4 of the 21st century, and support a competitive industry. The reform will bring a more efficient regulatory decision-making it will expedite scientific assessments and result in faster approvals. And actually, some of the learnings from the pandemic, it was mentioned earlier, it was a very challenging period, but it has brought also some very significant learnings, experiences that we try to really feed into the proposal. The EMA will get a more efficient structure, and an accelerated phased review of promising medicines would be foreseen, again, building on the lessons from the pandemic. A strong digital transition is also absolutely critical. The use of AI, real-world evidence, and fingers crossed, again, a proposal that is in Parliament, the European health data space, an immense transformational potential to have a single market of data. Using the real-world evidence in regulatory decisions, having electronic product information. There are many examples where I think digitization will also come and improve our regulatory system. Maybe the last example of the quite long list is I wanted to mention the regulatory sandboxes and adaptive frameworks to really facilitate the approval of groundbreaking new medicines while guaranteeing the principles of safety and efficacy. We have been particularly thinking of SMEs there, but of course, not only. I think the regulatory pathways are in principle open for everyone. Simplification measures in the different regulatory procedures should help saving annually up to 200 million for the health systems and roughly 100 million for businesses. I don't know what your calculations are, but at least they should be sizable. And finally, let me conclude with that. It has been mentioned before, the challenge of shortages. Already the reform package foresees a number of measures in that respect, enhancing monitoring, mitigation of shortages, in particular critical shortages, both at national level and by the EMA. And some of those measures are anticipated, not out of any disrespect for the co-legislators who are still looking into it, but simply some ideas make sense. Sometimes the proposal is simply codifying what has been proven and tried and tested in practice with the EMA cooperation with the member states, the European Commission. And one of those examples is the list of critical medicines that has been adopted. These are voluntary measures anticipating the proposal. And with that, I'd like to thank you for your attention and look forward to discussing.
Thank you very much for your great opening, and I count on your voice during the first session, during the first debate. And now I would like to ask Ms. Ewa Piasecka on behalf of Polish presidency, Health Attaché, Permanent Representation of Poland to European Union, please.
Thank you, and first of all, let me thank to Mr. Adam Jarubas for the initiative to organize this meeting today. It's a very timely discussion, taking in consideration also the ongoing negotiations in the Council between member states. Also, we need to discuss now, bearing in mind that the time pressure for the European Parliament to adopt its position on the pharma package is approaching more. So basically, it's a very timely discussion. So maybe let me underline that from the Polish perspective, in this revision process, we need to balance both the interests of innovative and generic industry and mainly focus on the solution that prioritizes the needs of all patients in the EU, regardless the place where they actually live. And this is also what should be our main goal when processing the revision. And this is why we support the Commission proposals in the sense that it tries to respond to many calls of member states, as Director already mentioned, not only member states, but also European Parliament, that we have to find the solutions, take actions to ensure more available, accessible and affordable medicines for all patients in the EU. And in our view, of course, the detailed Commission proposals need further adaptations to the particular situations of all member states. And we agree that maybe we have to make the system more predictable, both for the innovative and generic industry, but also we need to contribute to achieve better balance when referring to the burden of member states' healthcare expenditures, because this is something what at member state level we barely face with. And I wanted to underline that now during the Belgian presidency, we started analyze the detailed analysis of the proposed text in the council. So really the complex discussions, especially in the field of the most interesting topic, I mean incentives, are ahead of us. And I believe that we will agree on the solutions that at the end would positively influence on the accessibility and availability of medicines, but also, as I said, that bearing in mind the sustainability of healthcare budgets. And this is also, let's say, a call to the European Parliament today, as we have this discussion, to consider when adopting the final position, to consider the balance that has to be achieved with the aim to ensure fair access to efficient, safe, and affordable medicines, as I already underlined, to all patients in the EU. And last but not least, let me also underline that Poland, as an upcoming presidency, in less than a year already, we will also put the negotiations on the revision as a very high priority on the agenda, and we will do our best to formalize the best compromise also in the Council. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I would like to give a field to Dr. Żaneta Zemła-Pacut, because I think after two voices from the institutions, European and Polish one, now it's a time for a kind of scientific approach to this problem. Yes, please.
Thank you very much for this invitation. It's my pleasure to be here and to contribute to the discussion with a more scientific or academic perspective. After what has been already said, after the voices of Commission and of Poland's upcoming presidency, I was asked to do something almost impossible. It means to present the legal framework of the legal protection for pharmaceuticals within 2 or 3 minutes. So I prepared 2 slides, and apologies up front for any simplistic or oversimplified remarks here. But as you can see, the picture is utterly complex, not to say complicated. We have 2 layers of protection for pharmaceuticals. One is patent plus SPCs. The second one is regulatory data or market exclusivity. How do they interact with each other? What is their role? What is their impact, influence on the market is what we also want to discuss today. And to understand those interactions and those interplays, let's have a look at the slides here. So at the first slide, I showed patent protection, 20 years, which is complemented or supplemented by maximum 5 years of supplementary protection certificate. And on the lower axis, there is regulatory data protection. As it is now, it is 8 years of data exclusivity, or data protection, as it's called in the Commission proposal, supplemented by market protection, 2 years, which can be extended by 1 year in the case of new indication with significant clinical benefit. So maximum it is 10 or 11 years protection, which is overlapping with patent and SPC. So in most cases, the 2 forms of protection, patents and SPCs, and regulatory exclusivities run parallelly, run together. 2 important moments are on this slide. First, marketing authorization. So when the reference drug is coming to the market, this is the moment when also specific limitations of patents start to work, like Bolar exception. Bolar exception allows generic producers to develop, to research on a generic product so that it can enter the market as soon as it is possible, so as soon as the last form of protection expires. This is the second important moment on the market, the generic entry. And now what we are talking here, what we are discussing here is when the generic entry may actually happen and whether the regulatory exclusivities can impact the moment when the generic entry happens. I also put in the corner very short exhibit of IQVIA report, which says that for a specific cohort of pharmaceuticals which or whose protection expired in the last 6 years, there is quite surprisingly for 31% of those, the last form of protection was regulatory exclusivity. So not patent, not SPC, not even the pediatric reward, which is granted as the extension of SPC, but regulatory exclusivity. That shows that we need to pay a lot of attention to what we grant and how long the regulatory protection is given, or what impact is given, because it can really impact the generic entry. And my second slide, it shows in a very short way the proposal of Commission. So what is on the upper axis is what is the current framework of regulatory exclusivities, and down there the proposal. Again, in very simple words, the regulatory data protection now is 8 years, as I said. It is extended by 2 years of market protection. It can be extended by 1 year only, and only once. So it's not evergreen process, but just one time, 1 year extension for new indications with clinical significant benefit. What is proposed is regulatory data protection period reduced to 6 years, plus 4 periods that can be given on certain conditions. 2 years if the medicine is supplied in the whole European Union, 6 months if it meets so-called unmet medical needs, another 6 months if it is being tried with or against a comparator, and 1 year all the same if a new indication is registered in the meantime, but this time it is not market protection but data protection which is extended. Upon all this, there is again 2 years of market protection given as in the current situation, and in the proposal there is also 1 year of transferable exclusivity voucher, which is something completely new, and I think we are going to discuss it in extension later. So to sum up, from 8 to 13 years of protection. This is the difference between what we have and what we can have if the proposal becomes law. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for simple words describing the complex problem. And now voice to Mr. Lech Pielawski, member of the European Economic and Social Committee. Yes, please.
Thank you very much. Better late than never. Cheaper doesn't mean better. What?
Closer to mic, please.
Okay. Better late than never. And cheaper doesn't mean better. Thank you for inviting me to this debate. Only COVID, as Mr. Jarubas said, and disruption in global supply chains made us realize how much the EU depends on supplies from Asia, and not only from Asia. How the fight for lower drug prices and the Montman and API production destroyed pharmaceutical industry in Europe. So from ESC perspective, they are very important topic because we all need medicines every day, every month, every year, and everywhere. And the pricing is going up, but we need not so high prices in Europe. In many countries, we can see many differences between one country, second country. So there are problems, and we in ESC work about it and prepare 3 opinions. 2 was accepted by plenary session. 1, it was opinion about pharmaceutical package, and second one about Critical Medicine Act. We will be discussing about it later. And we are preparing the opinion about the list of critical medicines. So there are very important problems for all society, for European Union. We need to compete in this area, and of course, we have to pay more than earlier because costs are going up. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And now I would like to ask Mr. Tomislav Sokol, a European Parliament member, EP SANT coordinator and shadow reporter for these topics that we are going today to discuss. 2 days ago, the ENVI committee has discussed priorities for current Belgian presidency. Among them were also drugs shortages. And could you please tell us what is the current status and some comments on that, on the legislative process in European Parliament and especially in ENVI committee, please?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me. I have to first congratulate my friend Adam Jarubas, who is chair of the SANT subcommittee, for bringing the crucial stakeholders here. I know all of you. I've had, I think, or almost all of you. I've had a lot of meetings with all of you. So I'm glad that we have both parts of the industry, both the innovatives and the generics present, patient groups, institutions, medical professionals. So this is a really representative event, and I'm glad that this is the case. So I will focus on the pharma package because here I'm the shadow rapporteur on the regulation. So I will talk more about the regulation than the directive. So we have as you know, two pieces of legislation. My colleague Pernil Weiss is the rapporteur on the directive. So I'll not speak too much about that, just a bit, but I will focus more on the regulation that I'm currently working on. So when we speak about the pharma package, I think we have to start from the objectives. So what we want to achieve, and I think the main objective should be that all European patients get the medicines they need approximately at the same time. And so this should definitely be the main priority. And then the question is how to achieve this objective. And I think here that we cannot do it without the industry. So we cannot do it without incentives. We cannot do it without both parts of the industry, because each one of them has a role to play. What is important is that we do not fall into the trap that we say that we have interests in the industry on one side, interests of the patients and access to medicines on the other. So that there is no dichotomy here, because we cannot have one without the other. And so I think this is the paradigm shift that we have to make, because in a lot of cases in the parliament we hear that these interests are opposite one against the other, etc. So if you think like that, then we'll have a problem and we will not get anything done. Of course, if we want to have strong industry, if we want to stimulate creation of new medicines, we have to take all of these things into account. It is also the fact that in the current global situation, which is getting more and more uncertain, when you have a lot of alliances forming which are outside of the Western world, let's say, that also being as self-sufficient as possible in the production of medicines in Europe is important. So stimulation and bringing innovation to Europe is very important. But on the other hand, obviously as well, it is important that these medicines are affordable, that it is possible that we provide them to the patients in all the member states, in all the regions, in all the member states at approximately the same time. So as I said, so we need to have a balance between all of these factors if we want to achieve the objective that we need. To be concrete on the regulations, as you know, regulation deals with the procedure. I think that's probably the best part of the proposal. This is the area where we in the parliament probably will agree the most on the commission, in the sense that the processes in front of European Medicines Agency are faster, more streamlined, more simplified. There are possibilities and there is room for improvement there, but generally that's a good part. And me as the shadow rapporteur envisage some changes, but nothing fundamental and systematically different. On the incentives, I think when we speak about incentives, we really have to focus on those areas where we have the biggest gaps. And in the regulation that I'm working on, we deal with incentives for orphan drugs, so for rare diseases, and also for pediatric medicines for children. And in that area, obviously, I think these are the area where we have the biggest gaps. orphan drugs legislation that we've had in the last 20 years has done a lot in terms of the stimulating development of new medicines, but still more than 90% of patients who suffer from rare diseases do not have an adequate treatment available for them. So definitely we need stronger incentives there. We need a stronger approach, and this is the line that I've taken in my amendments there. Also, what we proposed is to have strong incentives for medicines which are specifically devised for children, because there isn't a lot of medicines like that which are devised for children from the start. So of course, if we want to stimulate this development of these medicines, and children are definitely the vulnerable population, we need stronger incentives there. So in that sense, keeping the baseline as it is now in force for orphan drugs, but for those medicines which are specifically for children and which represent, which provide a high added value, which are breakthrough medicines, to have a bit stronger incentives there. When we speak about incentives, in addition to the years that we like to speak about, what is also very important is the predictability. And I think in that sense, the predictability and protecting the baseline, of course, is very important, because this is what is important when you invest, when you create business plans, that you actually know what is guaranteed. And of course, and not to be solely dependent or largely dependent on the area on additional things which are outside of your control. So additional incentives, yes, the modulation, yes, it's a good idea, but also protect the baseline. And of course, and when we speak about additional incentives, not to make them dependent on things which are outside of your control. So in that sense, I think these principles are important that need to be taken into account. Of course, obviously, we should this regulatory data protection, which is so important for stimulating innovation, also cannot go without any kind of limitation, just accumulate. And I think here also certain limitations are necessary so that we achieve also this balance, as I said, that we also make it possible that after a certain reasonable period, medicines are put on the market and made available for the healthcare systems also at lower prices. So I mean the generic industry. So this is a very fine line, this balance which needs to be achieved between the interests and needs of those industries, which is necessary both if we want to stimulate creation of new medicines, taking all the risks which are involved when developing new medicines, because most new medicines which are developed do not succeed in the end, so that all of these risks can then be recouped, and of course, because and to actually have new medicines developed, but also then to make it acceptable and financially possible for national systems to purchase. What is also important here is that the legislation is not a silver bullet. That's also important, because still the most important factor which determines how medicines gets to the patients is pricing and reimbursement. And this is primarily national competence. So what we can legislate on the European level is the procedure for putting medicines on the market through EMA, but that providing also incentives to stimulate innovation. But on the other hand, also pricing and reimbursement, different national systems are still a very important factor to play. And here we have a very limited role. And here I would like to again emphasize something that I've been saying for the last 5 years, since the beginning of the mandate, that we need to change the revised transparency directive from 1989, which is 35 years old, never been changed, which actually set some requirements, principles on how these decisions are made on the national level. So to have much more transparent systems than we have now, which will then make it definitely easier to see what criteria were taken into account when decisions were made, and also to facilitate the decisions on national level on pricing and reimbursement are made faster, because this is something that definitely influences a lot when medicines get to the patients. On the question of, obviously, of access, as I said, we need to strike a balance. It's important that these gaps that we have, that medicines, that there are extreme differences in terms of time when medicines get to different national markets, that these differences we need to do something about these differences, because if it takes one new medicine 1 or 2 additional years to get to the Croatian, Polish, or Bulgarian market when compared to some other markets, then we have a problem. I think what is important here is that when there is a need for new medicine, within a member state, that this can be provided within the shortest possible period of time. So I think, as I said, I will not get too much into the directive, but I think that what my colleague, the rapporteur, has proposed is a good starting point, so that when there is a request made, that these decisions are made at the right time. Also, just short, and then I'll finish with the directive. Just shortly on the BOLAR, I think it's important that we have a clear and legal framework when generic medicines can be put on the market, so that there is no uncertainty, that there is no situation that there is no room for different interpretations in different member states, because this also influences the differences between in terms of access to medicines, and we cannot have patients of first and second class. So to have a clear, harmonized EU rules when generics can be put on the market to resolve the problem of legal uncertainty is also very important. And on the regulation, to be concrete, apart from the incentives, there are also some additional important things in the regulation. So first, I think on the antimicrobial resistance and antibiotics, we need incentives so that the development of new antibiotics is viable. We have the voucher, which is not the perfect proposal, but we still haven't heard, at least from my point of view, a better alternative. So definitely there is room for improvement there, but the alternatives that we heard, which have been proposed to have some kind of a public funding, new agency or whatever, definitely is not, I think, the good approach, because there's a lot of evidence that this kind of approach doesn't work. So to have the voucher as a starting point, listen to other ideas as well, but try to improve the voucher. But definitely, at the moment, I haven't heard still something better. But of course, we can talk about additional incentives, push and pull incentives, etc. Also, I think one good idea in the proposal is the idea of sandboxes, since new medicines are being developed very fast. We have medicines which are based on genomic data. We have personalized medicines which are being developed. So there are so many changes in the technology and how medicines are being developed that we need to have some regulatory flexibility to make it easier for these new medicines to develop. I think for that reason, sandboxes are a very good idea. We are often too rigid in Europe when we speak about regulatory framework. I think sandboxes are a good idea, and I fully support it, and I will fight for it in the Parliament. On the area of shortages, also very important. I think definitely there is the idea, the concept, the direction of the Commission is good, but I think we have to focus. For instance, shortage prevention plans, since this also creates a lot of burden on the industry, especially for small companies. I think that we should really focus on those medicines in those areas where needs are the most, which are most critical. So focus on critical medicines, I think, is the best possible approach, so that there we can really make plans in advance and prevent these shortages from occurring. So to really focus on critical medicines where needs are the biggest. And the last point also about the organization of EMA, I think the idea of streamlining, simplifying is good. What is important is also that patients groups are involved, so the stakeholders are involved, and I will fight strongly as within the area of health data space, that they are included as much as possible in the decision-making structure itself. Unfortunately, I haven't succeeded in the European health data space, because the majority in the Parliament was against me. But I hope that here it will be a bit better, because I think that representative patient groups are very important stakeholder, and their voices need to be heard, because their point of view, I think, is crucial, because it is them that we want to benefit the most from what we are doing. So to sum up, I think this is a very important piece of legislation. It is not a silver bullet. It cannot resolve all the problems, especially in terms of access, but I think we have a possibility to make it better, to improve it. We need this balance of all interests if we want to achieve access. So both tiers of the industry plus the question of access, to really strike the right balance, that we really achieve what we want, that we achieve the objective, and that is that patients get the best possible treatment. On the timeline, of course, we will not be able to finish the complete process before the end of the mandate. The goal is to finish the first reading in the Parliament before elections, to have this voted in April in the last plenary. It will not be easy, but from my side, I can say that we'll do whatever we can to really make it work. When I say whatever we can in terms of having more meetings, etc. This will not be a problem for us, but of course, we will never support the solutions which we don't think are not the best possible solutions. So we will not compromise on that. So, but I think definitely this is a very important piece of legislation. Once we make it, this will not be changed for at least 15 years. This is because it's very complicated to change this the legislation in the European Union, especially such a complex legislation. So we need to get this right, and I will do my utmost to achieve that. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Legislation is not a silver bullet, but it is necessary basis for all other actions. I think therefore.
This legislation, because I said there's additional legislation that will have to work in the next mandate.
Okay. So it's clear you have mentioned a list of different issues that we want to talk. So I will ask everybody to go smoothly to the first panel discussion, which is supposed to be focused on pharmaceutical package, especially all those issues that Mr. Sokol just talks. I like data exclusivity and market exclusivity, vouchers for AMR, Polar clause, but as well as unmet medical needs and equal access to new medicines across all European countries. Therefore, the first voice in this panel discussions, I would like to ask the representative of European Patient Forum, Ms. Anka Toma, the Executive Director of EPF, please.
Good afternoon, and thank you for the invitation. I'm very encouraged by the comments made before and by the commitment of the institutions to advance this file. It's really important. At the European Patients Forum, our main mission is to try to achieve the best possible healthcare for all patients everywhere in Europe. So the intentions of the European Commission about abolishing the postcode lottery or the country code lottery and to enhance access, they're very much welcome. In general, and I agree with you, Mr. Sokol, there shouldn't be a dichotomy between access and incentives. There shouldn't be a dichotomy between market and people. It shouldn't be that way. So I very much, I'm here to, first of all, urge all of you making these decisions and participating in these discussions to start from the premise of those who benefit or suffer or don't benefit from this legislation. This legislation is made for patients, even though it's a market legislation. And if it doesn't benefit patients, then it's not good legislation. Now, I had a few discussion items on this, on data. Oh, okay, first of all, access. We define access as based on 5 A's, not 3 like the Commission. We have 5, and it's been like this for a while. There's the availability, there's the affordability, there's the adequacy. We must never forget the safe and high quality, the safety and high quality of medicines, the appropriateness to patients' needs, and finally the accessibility. They should be accessible to patients. Patients should not wait for treatments. So when it comes to the market mechanisms, the data protection, the market exclusivity, if we're looking at them from the from our 5A perspective, it is important to balance the incentives for innovation with the accessibility and affordability and availability of medicines. And we must not forget that in the end, measures that can threaten the sustainability of healthcare systems will ultimately result in delays and in bad medicine for people. we saw the conditionalities for between access and incentive, between access and data incentives as an interesting idea. But again, predictability and transparency of criteria is very important, and it's important for patients because we also need to know what we're counting on. On this final issue of access, I would also stress, in agreement with you, Mr. Sokol, that the transparency directive is not being implemented correctly. We all know that. The delays are too slow, and too often member states do not respect their own deadlines. And here I must call on obligations for industry to be matched with obligations on member states. Access for patients is not in the hands of patients. And while we are not involved in that decision making, the next best thing we can ask is for all actors to take their responsibilities and their legal obligations seriously. We live in a region of universal access, of universal healthcare. On unmet medical needs, we beyond the incentives for medicines, I'm not going to comment on that because I think for us this is a technicality, and it's something that you can probably sort out in a transparent way. What is much more important is that whatever definition of unmet needs there is, that it does actually take into account the actual unmet needs of people. And at the moment, the definition is very much, it's very much medicalized, and it's very much not patient-centric. So for us, it is really important that any definition of unmet needs is inclusive of patients, that it incorporates indicators that matter to patients, such as appropriateness of existing treatments or patient experience data like quality of life and mental health implications and participation in the labor market, and all of these things that are not currently being taken into account. I think another topic that we were asked to comment on was the transferable exclusivity vouchers. Whatever mechanism is found for incentivizing antibiotic development, we very much believe that the key is that new antibiotics remain available. So availability of antibiotics when they're needed remains the key criterion for us. So we would not discard other solutions, such as those found in Sweden in subscription models and push and pull. There's probably a combination of measures that can be taken there in addition or instead of vouchers that ensures, in addition to development, to incentivizing development of antibiotics, that they are available. Too often, novel antibiotics are not available because there being no market, there is also no supply.
Okay, one more comment because
One more comment.
I have to be a
On
timekeeper.
the
Sorry.
Bolar clause, we generally support an extension of the Bolar clause because it may lead to more choices for patients and competition. But I had to take my 5 minutes. Thank you.
Okay, it was actually 7, but that's okay. Patients go first. Patients go first. Yeah, of course.
Oh,
Okay,
thank
so
you. You will usually come last, actually. So I enjoyed.
no. It was Of course, that patients go first. Okay, let's go to the industry and other stakeholders that are above patients or besides patients or anywhere outside the patients. The first voice from the payers, and I would like to ask Mr. Yanis Natsis, European Social Insurance Platform, Director of ESIP. Please.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation, honorable parliamentarians. Congratulations on the initiative of bringing us together. I understand that today we're here to discuss, and I hear a lot about incentives, which means that I hear a lot about carrots, but I don't hear enough about sticks. And I'm bringing this up. Why? Because as Rainer Berker said before, but also Eva Piasecka representing Poland, we need to rebalance the system because indeed there is an issue, for instance, with affordability. We should not forget that in 2019, the first line on the mandate of the commissioner, of the health commissioner, was to make sure that we have affordable medicines. And that is still a problem. And I know that Mr. Sokol, and I agree with him, thanks to the, for instance, the orphans legislation that has been introduced in Europe over the past 24 years by now. And in general, thanks to very favorable legislation that we've had in Europe over the past 24 years, we have seen some fantastic innovation. I think a lot of patients have definitely benefited thanks to these incentives in place. But at the same time, it is important to take a look back and take stock of what has happened over the past 20 years, and especially, for instance, in the field of orphan drugs, especially now that we see the trend to orphanize the regulatory environment even further. There, I would like to sound a bit the alarm and say that across all our members, statutory social security institutions, we see a worrisome trend. We see very, very high prices, which are only becoming higher. And not only that, but we see that for products that come onto the market with very limited data. Therefore, it is important to address this conundrum of weak evidence with very, very high prices, because it is a question of solidarity, and it's not only about the competitiveness of the industry. And of course, it is important. We are the first ones to say, as social security institutions, as I would say, guardians of the welfare states that we still enjoy in Europe, that it is important to have growth in industries and jobs and social security contributions in Europe. So do not get me wrong, but it is important to get it right. And it is important to talk about sticks and not only about carrots, because as Rainer reminded us at the very beginning, every month of exclusivity, which practically means some sort of a longer monopoly, this has a clear budget implication. And for us, especially as social security institutions, we don't only look at health, but we also look at pensions, at family benefits, unemployment benefits, everything that puts together the true treasure that we have in Europe, which is the welfare state. So for us, it is important to remind all of us of the basics, which is that we should still not lose sight rather, and focus on the need to have affordable medicines. Therefore, to answer your questions for this panel, obviously, we welcome the reduction of the baseline to 6 years of the Commission. We hear a lot of interesting ideas going around, especially these weeks in this House, where it seems that it's like a menu free for all, incentives for anything and everything, incentives for this, incentives for that. That is causing us a bit of an alarm. It is understandable as we get closer to the conclusion of the first reading, but we need to set actually a cap, because otherwise we're going to have a serious budget issue, which is very real. And I just want to remind all of us that, again, in the past 24 years, we have introduced in Europe very favorable and I would say, industrial policy legislation, the orphans legislation, the ATMPs legislation. So I do not understand exactly, or for instance, in Europe, all of us, at least in this room, we know that we're still the most generous when it comes to RDP. So are companies already leaving? If they are leaving, then they should tell us what is the truth in that. On the vouchers, we think that it is a worrisome idea. It can set a dangerous precedent, although, of course, I agree with Mr. Sokol, we need to look at alternatives. We are very much interested in what HERA is working on and what HERA will be announcing in the coming months and weeks and months. And therefore, just to reinstate and to say also that in light of the ongoing discussion around shortages and what we see across Europe and what we saw also last winter, and we see how this winter is going, the answer cannot be simply higher prices for everything. So you just pay more and therefore you don't have a shortage. That should not be the answer.
Shortages
very
will be
much.
shortages will be the top specific topic
Yes,
for
yes,
the
yes.
second part.
I wrap up here and hopefully we'll have the time. Thank you very much.
Yeah, anyway, I appreciate your reality check. Thank you very much. And now let's go to the drug industry, because we don't want to talk about sticks. We'd rather talk about drugs. And maybe first voice to Natalie Moll, FPA, Director General. Yes, please. What's your perspective on these issues and how do you perceive this process?
Thank you so much for the invitation, and really thank you for getting us together even at this moment in time when things are being discussed in this House. It's important to be able to share information that is real and helpful for those making the decisions. I think going back to the origin of why we're doing this is a legislation that is now 20 years old. And what we want to do is future-proof it. We don't want to get it right for the problems of today or yesterday. We also want to get it right for the problems of tomorrow and the opportunities of tomorrow. And that's really important. As MEP Sokol was saying, hopefully we won't be doing this for another 15 years. And this legislation will work for the kind of innovation that will come for the next 15 years. And that's really important to me, maybe because I'm a scientist and I like biotech and I can see what's coming down the road for patients. For me, it's really important that the legislation that we have today, which is old in terms of approving products, in terms of assessing products, is really the best possible in the world. And some of the proposals contained in the Commission text are fantastic in that sense. And they were mentioned by Dr. Berger, but also by MEP Sokol around sandboxes and simplifying what we've already learned in EMA, the way that we manage. So I think these will be crucial if we want to get this right. So again, what are we trying to achieve for today and tomorrow with the revision? It's really important. The other thing we're trying to achieve, I think, is to make sure that Europe becomes a front runner again in producing innovative medicines, right? So 25 years ago, 1 out of 2 new medicines was produced here, invented here, and now it's 1 out of 5. I would rather, maybe because I have 3 nationalities, that Europe became, again, European nationalities, that Europe became a front runner again. And to do that, well, how can we reverse? How can we make the environment for our SMEs, for our researchers, attractive enough to stay and invent things and develop things in Europe? And so when you talk about sticks and carrots, we have a few hammers at European level as well. Yanis already existing. When I think of cost containment measures that member states have, I wouldn't call them sticks, I'd call them hammers. So there are ways of managing budgets that are already implemented. But the important thing is getting the balance right and introducing in this legislation, but also in other ways, improved access, because the previous legislation 20 years ago was never created for access. That's not what it was about. Now we want to add an element of access in this legislation. Let's do that. But let's not just do that in the legislation. Let's think about what else. Because as an industry, our objective is that all patients get access on day one, like they do in some countries. We would love that to be the case in all countries. How can we have a conversation about that, which is never going to be in a text of however many pages? It really has to happen outside of that. What are the barriers? How can we do that? And you have an industry that's put proposals on the table that is doing things for access today, but it's not enough. We need everybody else to sit around the table. We need that solidarity among member states. We need that transparency directive to be respected. We need lots of other things for access. So I would hate for this legislation to become everything about access and not everything about getting safe, efficacious, innovative medicines on the table to patients quickly. So I think that's really important for me from where I'm coming. We talked about, there's been some discussion around what kind of IP or RDP and what kinds of environments there are and the cost and price of medicines. Some of the calculations in here, I'm sorry, Rainer, I'm going to disagree with you. The 1.23 billion that you mentioned is based on net prices, and countries don't pay net prices. And I think it's important that we think about medicines not just as a cost, but also as an investment. If you look at a few examples like the hepatitis C drugs that now when they came off patent and as soon as there's been competition, the price has reduced, over a 20-year horizons, you have some incredible savings for those drugs. 45 million euro saving in Romania, 25 million euro saving in Italy, 275 million euro savings in Spain. Innovative medicines are not just a cost. Of course, there's an upfront cost, but there are some savings when you introduce those products into healthcare systems, there are less interventions, less hospitalizations, lots of less physiotherapy, lots of capacity, whether it's things like hepatitis C diseases or other things like rheumatoid arthritis, where we also have a reduction in cost to the healthcare systems between 20 and 50%. So I think it's important when we look at the continuum, this legislation touches the continuum of assessment of medicines. What do we want to achieve? Again, we want to have the safest possible medicines available. We want to make sure the legislation can assess those, also the future ones that are being developed. And we want to make sure that these are made accessible to patients as quickly as possible, but not just using the legislation. So that for me will be important as well. The debate around sticks and carrots, etc. For me, what's important from an innovative industry point of view, SMEs, larger companies, they need predictability. They need to know how long their protection is. I can't believe it's already been 5 minutes, but okay, I'm willing to believe you. And this is extremely important. The regulatory data protection is not for the kind of blockbuster medicines that we've seen in the past. They are for medicines that are more personalized and that therefore in their nature will not be blockbusters. And they are the ones that are being tailored for the highest unmet medical need, which is another one of the objectives of this legislation, to make sure that we meet more unmet medical needs. So let's be clear on what we're trying to achieve and what measures we are developing. On AMR, I don't need to say much more than MEP Sokol mentioned, apart from the fact that in the directive, the obligation to file and to market will be applicable also to antibiotics, to answer your point, Anka. So I think there's something there that's also interesting. But at the moment, there are no other proposals for incentives that would have the same kind of delinked from revenue, aligned with stewardship as the TEV has today. And on BOLA, we support a clarification, but not a race to the bottom. Again, there you need to be able to have very predictable environment for industry to operate, the innovative industry and the generic industry, because we are a cycle. And if we can't follow each other, the cycle is broken and we all lose, and the first person to lose is the patient. So here, I think, let's be very careful what we're trying to achieve, and let's not make this an industry versus patients, because this is not the purpose of this legislation in the first place. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. You have introduced already the second tool. The first was sticks and now hammers. And I wonder what kind of tools will introduce to our discussion Mr. Adrian van der Hoven, Director General Medicines for Europe. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to refer back to Mr. Jarubas, because I think the main point of this legislation, or one of the key points of this legislation, was the lessons learned from COVID-19. In March 2020, there was a huge surge in demand for ICU medicines, and many governments were threatening our industry with seizing our medicines because they wanted to hold it for themselves, and especially the biggest member states in the European Union. And we said, we're not going to play that game because we're going to serve all European patients. And in fact, I put myself under, let's say, surveillance by the Commission. And this man here made me sign a letter that I would be criminally liable if I didn't follow his rules exactly. So since I'm not in prison, I guess we did something right. In any case, I think also it followed with the vaccines that all Europeans would get the COVID vaccines, not just the Europeans in the large European, West European states. And I think this is the true lesson from COVID-19. It was messy, certainly wasn't beautiful, but somehow it worked. And let's talk about this, what's in the legislation. It's very complex, as was pointed out by our guest speaker here. But the key point is we know that innovative medicines are not reaching all patients. There is a massive divide between Western Europe and Eastern Europe, and between very large or medium-sized countries and very, very small countries. There is a massive gap. And you can see this gap also in the health outcomes in major diseases. Look at cancers, compare those health outcomes. This is real. So if we do not fix the equity problem, we do not fix the health problem. So of course, the modulation of incentives, what is our role there? If Natalie's members do not deliver to all the member states, we will come along as generic and biosimilar medicines and do that job, and we are ready to do so. We think it's important that this incentive works and that we can actually come to market if certain countries are not served. Another key point, it was mentioned, repurposing. I think this is an affordable form of innovation. The Commission is looking at it two ways, a charitable way, if you wish, or a nonprofit way, and a commercial route to this. I think it's important. It's not going to be a revolution because we still have to get through these nice guys here. But I'm sure at least it's a starting point. It's a basis for moving forward. And I think this is super positive. I'd like to come back to what Natalie mentioned about the Bolar clause. So I think it's very important in terms of access to medicines that this is expanded. We have documented 50 cases, 50 cases, where generic or biosimilar medicines are delayed after patent or SPC expiry, which means we are extending artificially the monopolies in Europe. 50 cases, okay? Now, you're probably saying, well, who cares? It's just the generic industry. That's their problem. It's not just our problem. Let me give a case. We had a case where we were delayed on an important HIV medicine, where our members and the HIV patient community litigated throughout all the courts in the European Union, including the Court of Justice of the European Union, where clearly this SPC should never have been granted. We were artificially delayed all over in Europe on this. What did it mean? Well, for example, in Portugal, it meant spending 1% more of the healthcare budget on this drug. It also meant that 95,000 patients likely did not get access because of this delay. So it's not just our problem, it's the healthcare system's problem. We have similar cases in Central Eastern Europe where we were delayed with the launch of biosimilar cancer drugs. Okay, look at the access rates to innovative biologic cancer drugs in those countries. In a country like Romania, and I'm not saying this, it's the competition authority of Romania who has fined a company for these delays. So we are delaying access to patients because we don't have a proper Bolar clause. Active pharmaceutical ingredients was also mentioned. The current Bolar clause is not clear enough to cover active pharmaceutical ingredients, which means sometimes we're forced to delocalize the development of the active ingredient outside of Europe because of this. So we need to correct this now in this legislation. Last point on the voucher, I think for us, this is not about supporting novel antibiotics. This is about creating a market to extend monopolies on blockbuster drugs with huge costs. If we want to deal with the AMR access issue, we need to look at novel antibiotics, existing off-patent narrow spectrum antibiotics. Only 5 countries in Europe have access to those generic narrow spectrums. Why? We have to look at it as an access problem. And for that, there are models, for example, in Sweden that are being tested. We know HERA is studying this, but doesn't really have any money to do this. So maybe we need to think about it in this way so that all the antibiotics that we need, novel, coming from some of Natalie's members, and off-patent, coming from our members, will be available for all patients. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I think now is a good time for those who take the floor in the first row to make some 1-minute comments, let's say, maybe. Who was? Yes, please.
Yeah, I'd love to. Thank you very much for the occasion. We heard actually quite some recurring themes, and I even heard some convergence. So I think a lot of support for the idea. We do need incentives. We need it for timely equal access. We need incentives, unmet medical needs, other innovation. I didn't hear anyone really doubting that. And we also heard at least several times very powerfully from the payers, the need to be mindful of to have sustainability of the budget. So I think on the broader objectives, huge agreement. And whether it's 1.3, any simulation, we can debate the numbers. I could also quote a figure that comes from one of your members, internal figure, it was like 1 million a day that exclusivity would bring. But anyway, I think we all agree that we're talking about a lot of money here, a lot of money. If it's 1 billion, certainly money we don't have in the budget. And if you look at the aging population, money that we will not have in the future because it will only grow bigger and bigger. So that is the conversion of the principles. The challenge is the bridging. So we somehow need, and there again, convergence, somehow a balanced and measured approach. And because if you really just take the baseline and add the years and years of incentive, it just doesn't square with the sustainability of the budget requirements. I think the pockets are not endless of the member states, as our own pockets are not endless. So I think that is really on this balancing where the challenge is. And after months of discussing really interesting ideas of more incentives here and here and here on top, or maybe more and more burden on companies, the Commission has put forward a balanced proposal. And maybe after really this longer period of brainstorming, it may be a moment to come back and have a look at the balanced proposal that we have put forward. And maybe there is some greater merit in it than it may have looked to some at first sight. And if there are any questions, we're happy to discuss.
Thank you very much. Doctor, maybe you wish to comment? Or
Thank you so much. So I'm again very happy to hear from all of the participants the keyword of the discussion today: balance. Balance, predictability, stability. It's great to hear that. For me, the question is how to implement those words into action, right? And how to bridge the interests, the competing interests of so many of us, patients, various stakeholders, also reimbursers, states at the end of the day. So for me, one of the main topics of today's discussion was modality, conditionality, the length, the total length of the market data exclusivity. In international comparison, data and market protection are already longer in Europe than in other regions like US, Canada, many other regions that we know. However, on the other hand, the crucial question is how many products will really fulfill all the conditionalities that are set and reach the 12 years of protection. According to recent research, I like citing other researchers, other legal researchers, the additional 1 year incentive for the registration of new indication is used in about 40% of cases. So it's not that all of the innovative drugs enjoy the 1+ market protection. So again, as regards the criteria of unmet medical needs and the trial with the comparator, they seem mutually exclusive. So again, the question should or will all innovative drugs enjoy the total length of 12 or even 13 years or not? This is something that must be thoroughly analyzed. I want to focus on something else. And this is my main concern.
1 minute.
Yes, stability and predictability of the system. So for me, if we know that already regulatory exclusivities can be used as a game, as a strategic use, this is something that we should absolutely avoid here. So we should put all the energy and action into such limitation and restrictions of all the possible strategic use of regulatory exclusivities as only possible. And my last thought, for the sake of well-balanced but also certain legal system, we need certainty in the legal sense. So we really need to know what is the nature of data exclusivity and market exclusivity. I want to say that very recently a Munich court adjudicated that orphan exclusivity is an IP exclusive right, absolute rights, effective erga omnes, so against all and everyone. For me, it would be a great moment to address the question, what is the nature of data and market exclusivity? Maybe to put a soft way, in a soft way, an address in the preamble to exclude such judgments that would be very risky precedents for the future, and to avoid a situation that many domestic courts would adjudicate in a very unharmonized ways, in a very not uniform way, what data exclusivity is, what remedies the stakeholders have, what legal actions that they can raise, and finally, what injunctions they can get in those courts, in those institutions that are going to be seized. So for me, the certainty, the legal certainty is the utmost value of this reform also.
Okay, thank you very much. The last short comment from the panelists, and then we'll go to the Q&A session. Yes,
Yeah.
please.
Of course, as CAC, we have our position in this area. So, of course, from one side, we have to rebuild stronger pharmaceutical sector. And from second right, it is against, for example, to rebuild generic production in the European Union. So the regulatory exclusivity granted in the EU, as few people said here, are longer, for example, to the USA, Canada, Australia, China, and this current proposal of varied regulatory exclusivity according to activities carried out of original prolonged regulatory exclusivity in the EU, this would delay generic launches in the EU even more compared to other main markets in the world, which would deprive EU patients of access to affordable medicine, as Ms. Thomas said.
Thank you very much. Let's go now to the question and answers, if okay. But first of all, I would like to ask whoever is making a comment or answering a question to introduce himself or herself, that we know, and to speak to Mike. Please, first.
Yeah. My name is Karen Pramberger. I was invited by Medicines for Poland. I work for Polpharma, which is a medium-sized pharmaceutical company in Europe, manufacturing and selling above all in Europe. So this legislation is critical for us. I have a question for Mr. Becker, specifically on patent linkage. So we all know that patent linkage exists in Europe, in a number of countries in variations. For example, in some countries, it's not possible to get onto the pricing and reimbursement before patent expiry or loss of exclusivity expiry because it's considered patent infringement. That is the case in Poland, in Lithuania. There are other countries where it is considered patent infringement to participate in tenders, like, for example, Finland. There are other countries where it's considered patent infringement to be listed on a public listing, even to be able to offer medicines, like the Lauer-Taxe in Germany. So all this delays generic entry, generic launch by 1 or 2 weeks, or even months, or even, and we have examples for all these situations, 1 to 2 years. This is against what the European Commission said in its assessment report in 2019, namely that patent linkage is unlawful, it's anti-competitive, and shouldn't be allowed. So here my question to you, Mr. Becker. In view of the very low harmonization in Europe, where some countries have patent linkage, other countries do not have patent linkage, and where there is no abuse by the generics, which system do you favor? Do you favor a system with patent linkage, which would follow some of these member states and delay generic entry, or do you favor a system which is harmonized throughout Europe, which clearly states that patent linkage is not allowable? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Becker. Answer could be shorter than question.
That's difficult. No, thank you. The proposal we have put forward is the proposal I prefer. You will not see a provision on, or rather, I think in your interest, against patent linkage. It doesn't mean that it is not an issue. You have been given examples of national practices. Whether the solution to those is at European level to harmonize everything, or whether you may want to knock at the door of the originators of those national as you described them, issues. What I can tell you is that there's a very strong support to facilitate generic and biosimilar entry. It is a deal with society. We have 20 years of patent, we have data exclusivity, whatever. But once that is over, on day one of non-exclusivity, it should be possible in the interest of all of us, patients, health systems, that entry and can take place and price competition does start. So there, a very clear position in terms of which system I prefer. It's before the code legislators now, and you can read, and you will not find it in there. Happy to discuss bilaterally more.
Thank you very much. We have another question here. Yes, please introduce yourself and ask.
Yes, thank you, Boris Azais from MSD, a research-based company known as Merck in the US, but not in Germany. Yeah, on the linkage, I find it first ironic because it is one thing that will provide certainty. The linkage in the US, which the generic sector, all the companies support the linkage in the US, they actually love it because it's attached to an incentive and not in Europe, but it gives you launch on day one. If you want launch on day one, the linkage will give you a date, a very clear date. You can look it up in the Orange Book of the FDA. So first, I mean, we've heard a lot of things about the dramatic surge of incentives, but the fact is, from the Technopolis report produced for the Commission, actual exclusivity of innovative products went from 15 years to 13 years. So I guess the trend is not more IP. I'm sorry, that's on paper, but not in reality. Then in terms of the voucher, I mean, let's be clear, right now, there's few large companies, including MSD, that are still investing in novel antibiotics, but there are, a lot of small companies going bankrupt, trying to launch in Europe, and they launch in China, not even in Europe. And I'm sorry, but the payers right now do not provide a reward, any sort of reward for something that would be a novel antimicrobial. And we have heard since 2009, the Swedish presidency, 2009 made antimicrobial resistance a high priority. Why hasn't been anything done since? And I'm sorry, incentives work. So we need to fix this market failure.
So the question is?
And the question is, we're talking about, carrots and sticks, but I'm sorry, you can't call a carrot something where you're removing something and then you give it back. I guess you can call it an incentive, but then qualifying it as a carrot is a bit of a push. But I would say, for the modulation, yes, of course. I mean, the industry, including MSD, has made commitment to launch and to file and so forth. Look it up on the web to really accelerate access across Europe. But has it been tested? You see, I mean, we're talking about additional 2 years, but has it been tested? Can we say right now whether it would work?
I'm afraid that it's again to you.
I'll be very short.
Yeah.
Actually, something has been added, at least potentially can be added. But I never, and you didn't hear me talking about the multiplication of incentives. You heard me talking about the modulation of incentives to really make sure that for those things we really need innovation that meets the needs of the health systems, the patients, equal fair access, those things, that is a modulation of incentive. I didn't promise to industry a multiplication, but I do agree with you. Incentives are very important. This is a market economy. And there must be, I mean, I don't like to use those terms, carrots and stick, but if you want, there must be the carrot out there to really stimulate in this high risk business, those to take the risk and invest in innovation and really do produce innovation that we all need.
Thank you very much. We have another question here.
Hello, my name is Sędzimir Chmurzyński. I'm an IP expert in medicines for Poland. I have a question to Mr. Becker. I'm sorry, it's not innovative here.
Tough job, though.
Yeah, I wanted to refer to your first presentation when you've mentioned the cost of one additional year of data exclusivity. You've mentioned it's around 1.2, 1.3 billion euros. Ms. Moll has mentioned that it's slightly lower than that. But from my understanding, this is calculated from the perspective of the health insurance companies, and not from the perspective of generic companies. And I'm going to explain what I mean by this. Prolongation of regulatory data protection has a very clear impact on the European market. Generics come to the market later. But there is also a kind of aftermath that can be attributed solely to companies seated in Europe. There is a requirement in a vast majority of non-European markets. Those countries require the generic company who wishes to register the product in their market to register the same product first in the country of manufacture. If data exclusivity period is to be longer in Europe, it actually means that European generic companies are not able to do their business in non-EU markets. And I think this is an aftermath of the change that was not really foreseen. And I wanted to ask you whether you think that, well, the conclusion of the COVID crisis was that Europe needs to attract pharmaceutical companies back to Europe. I'm afraid that this measure may actually push generic companies out of Europe. They will be forced to manufacture outside Europe. And I wanted to ask you whether this was at all considered in the proposal, and whether you see any way of taking the position of generic companies into account. And I can tell you that.
Thank you. That's okay. Okay, Mr. Becker.
I don't want to step on Olivier's territory, but I think to have production in Europe, at least for certain medicines, is absolutely a conclusion we can draw from the pandemic. Whether we try to consider everything, what you've been referring to, our proposal is not in the vast majority of cases to have adding years of exclusivity. It can occur. How likely it is, I think we had a review here, maybe not. So it's not that we are adding an extra year. So that in our impact assessment, we should have projected the cost and the, what do you call it, the aftermath or the unwanted side effects for generics. The figure I refer to, if you like to look at the methodology, it's somewhere around page 40 of our impact assessment explained further. So for those who would like to look at the numbers, we looked, and I think that is the point I was trying to make, the cost for the public purse, for the health budgets of the member states. That is not the same thing as cost or hardships or difficulties of entering other markets for generics, which is a very relevant consideration, as are the considerations of the innovative industry. But I was referring to the costs, well, more, that's your turf, Yanis, of the public health budgets of the member states, the national health system, whatever you want to call it. That is the figure I was referring to. And that, I have to say, was a very high-ranking concern of us. Other concerns are also relevant, but that is really, because if we can't afford the whole thing anymore, we can close the shop. And I think that is the least any of us wants.
Thank you very much. There is a last chance. I've seen hands raised. Okay.
I just quickly need to respond to my good friend, Boris.
1 minute, and then 1 minute.
I understand why you would love patent linkage, because it would obviously be perfect for your company, which and the type of products it sells. But let me give a couple of examples of why it doesn't work for patients or for access to medicines. Currently, the Federal Trade Commission, which is kind of like a competition authority in the US, it has listed at least 100 patents in the US Orange Book, which is the patent linkage system in the US, as being potentially anti-competitive behavior by many originator companies. Maybe your company's on that list, I'm not sure. So this is already, I think, a very strong signal that this is being misused. In Italy, the competition authority has fined one of a major pharmaceutical company as well for manipulating the patent linkage system to delay generic access by 1 year. The case I was mentioning about HIV in Portugal was, again, the misuse of a patent linkage system to delay by 1 year the access to medicine. So it's fabulous for blockbuster profits, but it's not so great for access to medicines.
Thank you very much. The last comment to Mr. Natsis, but I would like to ask Anka Toma to have the closing remark for our discussion on behalf of the patients who are listening to us. So please, 1 minute.
Thank you. I'll be brief just to respond to Boris's comment. The TINA argument that there's no alternative doesn't work here because we have the Swedish model, we have the Netflix model. These are all worth exploring. The voucher, I don't know what the Commission was thinking. They got it completely wrong. We've been talking a lot today about predictability. What about the predictability on our side? The voucher is going to most likely create a very dangerous precedent. It's going to distort the market. The budget impact is much higher than the current forecast. And at the end of the day, yes, we talk a lot, and I will stick to I love that you like the label carrots, because these are very expensive and costly carrots. And these are brief privileges that the legislators reward or grant, if you wish, to the companies with. And therefore, we need to make sure that we get the balance right, because nobody is against having those incentives in place. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Discussion is getting better and better. I like it. And so one before last comment goes to Natalie, yes, and then Anka Toma.
So rather than talking about money, I'd like to talk about products and patients, and maybe a good segue to you, Anka, because when we look at the proposal and in the study that we did on the text, what we saw is the way it's set up, you would probably forego about 50 of the 225 products that would be coming up in the next 15 years. So let's talk about money, but let's talk also about the products and the availability of products in Europe for European patients, and who's going to be held accountable for that, not giving that innovation. And if there aren't innovative products, there are also no generics following on from that. So I just want to bring that into the plane. Let's not just talk about money, let's talk about products and availability. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Anka Toma, last word.
Okay, all this discussion about carrots and sticks and hammers, and what other tools were there? Okay, while all these stakeholders are busy with sticks and carrots, it is patients that get smashed over the head with the carrots and sticks. And I think it's not the best analogy, but the thing is, at the bottom of this is whether patients, people, citizens, you, me, our parents and brothers, sisters, and children are able to get the healthcare they need. It's not just about products, because there's a whole sustainability issue at stake. It's about healthcare systems that deliver, and medicines are part of it. So what I urge you is, please ask patients what works for them, put patients at the center of the legislation, involve patients in the decision-making processes, because there are important insights about the ultimate beneficiaries or victims of legislation that you can get directly from them. And that applies to the medicines, to the regulatory, to the pricing and reimbursement, to other things like HTA that we're not here to discuss, but there are many areas in which patients should be involved, and they're not. And this is also an opportunity to involve them.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Ladies and gentlemen, we are about to finish the first discussion panel, and I would like, without any technical breaks, invite you to the second discussion panel. And first of all, we are going to talk about securing Europe's medicine supply and envisioning a Critical Medicines Act. Like I mentioned 2 days ago on the ENVI committee, there was a presentation of Belgian presidency, and shortages of medicines were named as the most urgent health issue for Europe. And therefore, I'd like to welcome Mr. Olivier Girard, head of Unit Medical Countermeasures, DG HERA. Please open our discussion, give us some estimation and some assessment of the current situation and steps already taken and to be taken in the near future concerning. Please.
Sure. Mr. Jakubiak, Mr. Jarubas, thank you very much for having me in this very exciting roundtable. Honorable members of the Parliament and ladies and gentlemen, I think it's very useful now to focus on the topic which is going to keep us very busy in the coming month. And in this context, of course, I would like to just spend a few minutes with you discussing short-term measures and medium-term measures on addressing shortages of medicines. Clearly, a lot has been done by the Commission and by our colleagues at the EMA, our colleagues in the Medicines Agency, to develop mechanisms, solidarity mechanism, cooperation mechanism to prevent and fight shortages on a daily basis. And we are very impressed by all the work that is currently being done by the EMA, by what is called the Spoke Working Party, by the MSSG, to address those issues and see how between regulators we can address this issue and we can find solutions to this very pressing problem for EU patients. Of course, the Commission is also coming forward with very ambitious proposal in the pharma review, and Rainer can testify that clearly this should make a difference, and we are hopeful this can make a difference by preventing and by putting in place mechanisms to prevent shortages from happening. But the Commission has also acknowledged, and on this, of course, I would like to salute the work of the Belgian presidency. My colleague Laura Laguier is unfortunately not around today, but I take this opportunity to thank the Belgian presidency for all its work on this matter, on the fact that there is a realization that when it comes to fight shortages, we need a regulatory pillar. We need a legislative pillar, but we also need an industrial pillar. And the Belgian presidency was able to assemble the goodwill of more than 20 member states on the matter. And I think this has really been a game changer because, of course, the Parliament has always been extremely mobilized on this issue. But I don't think that before COVID, you could find the same coalition of the willing, I would say, on the side of the member state. And this coalition is now with us. And I think it is a game changer. And I think that this what has led the Commission to come forward with its communication on shortages in October. And I'm not going, of course, to detail the content of this communication. I'm more going to be forward-looking, and I'm going to focus on a couple of initiatives. Behind this, of course, the realization that COVID-19 in particular, but daily events in the supply of medicine has demonstrated that Europe is vulnerable and that the supply chain of a number of medicines is under threat. And for this purpose, we believe that there is the need to work together, to act together, and this could lead to legislation. And of course, the Belgian presidency and members of the Council and the Parliament are currently, of course, advocating for a critical medicines act. As far as the Commission is concerned, it is unfortunately not possible to come forward with legislation at this point in time, because to have legislation adopted, we need to have a Parliament which is in function, and unfortunately we're ending up now the mandate. But that should not prevent us from doing, I would say, the groundwork on what could be a critical medicines act. We do have precedents. We have successful precedents in other areas where the Commission has been able to come forward with ambitious proposals to create a favorable framework to facilitate investment in the field, in the industrial field, to come forward with useful regulatory proposal or regulatory adjustment. You have had the CHIPS Act, you have had the Critical Raw Materials Act, and we need to look very closely at what could be done with Critical Medicines Act before taking the decision. But the decision will be for the next Commission, will be for the next mandate. That doesn't mean that we should wait. Time is of the essence. So we have launched a number of initiatives. And of course, I would like to focus on the Industrial Alliance on critical medicines. We have a few days ago launched a call for interest. And we want to build a coalition to focus on the industrial challenge, which is to address the vulnerability of supply chain in the field of critical medicines, because we believe that this topic needs to be given more political attention from the EU decision maker, from the member states, and that it needs to go up the agenda. It is an industrial challenge, and of course, most of all, it is a challenge for the patients. And in this context, we want to have a coalition which is as broad as possible. It is built on the model of other alliances that we have already put forward in relation to batteries, in relation to chips, in relation to critical raw materials. But it has a twist, of course, because the ultimate beneficiary of this alliance are the patients of the EU. So we want, of course, the member states to be present, and it's not only for the industry. We want the patients association to be present. We want the health association to be present, and we want the mechanism to be transparent and accessible. So we invite you to join it and to participate. Concretely, what is going to be the alliance about? The work of the alliance should be evidence-based. So our starting point at the moment is the EU list of critical medicines. I think that is where we need to focus. This is where shortages, where they happen, can have the biggest impact on the patients. And for this purpose, together with the EMA, together with the Medicine Shortages Steering Group, we have identified the first sample of medicines where we believe we should focus at the beginning of the alliance, because they are diverse, they are representatives, and they should drive our work. And that should be the focus of the alliance. In terms of deliverables, we count on the alliance, first of all, to deliver concrete and strategic recommendations for the next parliament, for the next commission, to help us in prioritizing our work on issues and on tools that could provide an EU-wide solution when it comes to fighting shortages. We expect a strategic report to be adopted in the autumn. And we expect also, of course, the alliance to deliver on a number of key areas. There is a toolbox which is already available, but we believe that we need to take a very close look at it to maximize its potential. So as far as ERA is concerned, of course, we have developed a number of tools as a result of COVID-19. One of those, of course, is joint procurement. We believe that the lessons that we have drawn from the COVID-19 and the work that we have done all together to ensure access to medicines can be of use for the fight against shortages. But of course, this is not the only matter that we would like to cover. We would like to cover the issue of strengthening manufacturing in Europe. I think that there is definitely a topic that we need to discuss from an investment point of view, from a state aid point of view, how much we can mobilize public funding to ensure that there is more medicines being produced in Europe to ensure a better security of supply in this context. But we are not a closed continent. We need also to look at the international dimension. We need to look at the possibility to diversify our supply chain and to have partners abroad that could help us to secure our supply chain. We will want to discuss also the issue of skills. On skills, we do have a partnership which has been recently launched with the industry. So that's a topic which is obviously very important. And we might want also to look at the availability of data and the transparency of the provision of information on those shortages. But of course, those are topics that we put on the table. We are listening to the participants. We will be listening to the participants of the alliance moving forward. And all this should crystallize at the end of April with the informal EBSCO Council, where the Belgian presidency has kindly accepted to host the official launch of the alliance. So this is the beginning of a long-term process. The mandate of the alliance, the beginning of the mandate of the alliance is going to be 5 years because we are talking about an industrial and a public health challenge. And if we want to also develop a pipeline of projects, if we want to put the item on the agenda of the decision makers, we need to look at this in a medium-term fashion, and we need to actually build the coalition around those topics. So I will stop there. I'm very happy to take questions, but the message is we need your help, we need your support to bring this issue, the issue of shortages, on the agenda, on the top of the political agenda. We were able to identify key industrial challenges in the EU until now, and we believe that this challenge needs to be put on the top of the political agenda, and we believe that the Industrial Alliance will help us to achieve that aim. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I like especially your comment on the whole toolbox prepared, not only happens and sticks, but the whole toolbox is already ready. But seriously, I think the most important message is this sense of urgency that we are going to feel and we are going to implement with all these tools. Okay, so I would like to open this discussion for this session. And Mr. Lech Pilawski, please, if you could start our discussion, because I know that you have participated in preparing the European Social and Economic Committee statement on this particular issue.
Yes, it was exploratory opinion on request Belgium presidency. Okay, it was exploratory opinion on request the Belgium presidency, so it is very important topic. And of course, we try to prepare this opinion with many topics. I want only few comments to this whole opinion presented. So the first, that committee calls for urgent and robust action plan to attract the production of active pharmaceutical ingredients, APIs, and finished medicines to the European Union. So it argues a European Commission to set up a new comprehensive EU mechanism to support the production of API, the API market, and finished medicines in EU. So the main advantage of this new potential framework is that it has to lead to relevant EU legislation, which takes into account the specific nature of the production and of trade and active substances. Only a few other comments. In this opinion, we say that access to active substances and essential medicines becomes a weapon in geopolitical games. Mr. Jarubas said something about it, which is why the EU must be independent in the production of the strategic resources. Compensating for the difference in production costs between EU and Asia is a necessary cost of strengthening the security of EU citizens and must come from new dedicated EU funds. In order to ensure the highest possible availability of the strategic resources, urgent action by the European Commission is necessary to restore and rebuild the production of these products in various geographical regions of the EU. And few others. So to strengthen the European pharmaceutical industry, we need to reduce dependence on Asia. So it is, of course, we know about it. Increase investment attractiveness, stimulate research and development efforts, and review pricing policy, and create financial and institutional support in order to restore the production of active substances and essential medicines, for example, generics in the EU. Action must be taken with the European health data space in mind. The European health data space will help the EU achieve a quantum leap forward. In this way, it delivers healthcare to citizens. And what are our expectation? A Critical Medicines Act, which should take a form on EU regulation, would provide an overarching regulatory framework for the following: legislative framework, financing mechanism to develop industrial infrastructure for producing APIs and finished medicines in Europe, R&D, investment in infrastructure and technology, and operating cost during the financing period, and relevant EU guidelines on pricing in the European market for finished products and reimbursement so that APIs and finished medicines produced in Europe can be competitive. And one more. Yeah, only one, that what we want to improve, we will see in Europe that we have many waste in this area. So it is really a problem for Europe, because I think in every home we have small box and with
not that small, sometimes even bigger. Of course, thank you very much. Ms. Ewa Piasecka, some comments from the perspective of the incoming Polish presidency, which looks like be the crucial time for these issues.
Yes, thank you. And also let me underline that for Poland, the topic of the challenges related to the shortages at EU level is of the main importance. And we were also calling for many actions that has been last year initiated by the Belgians, but also the messages have been communicated many times also before, also because of the COVID pandemic and the reality that we have to confront with. And this is why we very much support the future initiative on the Critical Medicine Act. We think it's a worth initiative. We are now hearing that it might take some time still for the Commission to come up with the proposal, but I think we will discuss it. We will discuss it still between this time. And so this will be for sure the politically very high topic on the agenda. And I would like also to make a particular attention to the API production in Europe, because we mainly sometimes focus on the critical medicines and the medicines, of course, but then the API is crucial for the production, and we should not forget about the API the issue to back the API production to Europe. And also maybe just the last point, I wanted to go back to our previous panel discussion, just a short sum up that I think that we all of us talk about the balance, to find the balanced solution. So I think the only issue is how to define the endpoints of the.
Okay, thank you very much. Last call for questions. One more, Adrian, yes, please.
Yeah, so maybe also to the payers to the left. I think there is in place in most of the member states a kind of semi-formal negotiation taking place between the pharmaceutical industries, mainly the prescription industries, so mainly Natalie's members and my members, because you're operating mainly in the prescription space. And these are important negotiations because you have to operate within a certain financial framework. We have to fit into that financial framework, and it's a difficult negotiation. But I think in that framework, typically what it's about is the cost of innovation or something like this, the savings that biosimilars or generics are going to bring, and then you cap the budget within that kind of framework. Maybe one thing we could think about is in these frameworks, we have that budget kind of capping discussion, but maybe we could add to it a security of supply discussion. And I think it will not break the bank, because when we take, say, the antibiotics that we're currently looking at, or various sterile forms of injectable drugs, not all, but many of them, they're not typically the most expensive drugs. Actually, they're typically at the very bottom of the list. And so maybe this could be a new element to these kind of semi-formal negotiations that take place in almost every member state in practice. And this could be a stakeholder approach to finding part of the solution as well. And that would be balanced in terms of the concerns your members might have about budgetary impact.
Thank you, Mr. Jarubas. Mr. Becker, would you like to address it? Yes.
No, I don't have any comment on your suggestions. I just find it very interesting. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions? I cannot see. So let's go to the closing remarks. Mr. Adam Jarubas, please.
Shortly. Thank you very much for your participation. I think many important arguments were raised today in today's our discussion. This round table was not about convincing each other, but about deeper mutual understanding and recognition of the conditions underlying our position. I hope that such understanding will give us a greater openness and less dogmatic approach to the ongoing work on the pharmaceutical package. We know that we need a legal balance between the time needed to generate funding for R&D of medicines to unmet medical needs and the effect of competition that reduces drug costs for patients and the healthcare system of member states. For medicines to be available, firstly, they must be invented. Secondly, we must be able to secure its sufficient supply. And thirdly, we must be able to afford them. I'm very pleased that we are united in recognizing the importance of the problem of medicines shortage for the health security of Europeans, especially critical medicines, and the growing threat resulting from the difficult international situation. Ultimately, in a legal balance, health must prevail. So thank you very much for your time. Have a good evening.
Thank you very much. I would like to apologize for 5 minutes delay, but I believe that it's not only myself, it was our joint effort. So I also thank you very much all that were participated in Brussels, and also all that followed us via some online.
Almost 51 persons.
51 persons are now with us during the conference, were much more. Okay, thank you very much. I wish you a pleasant evening in Brussels. Thank you.